When federal investigators deploy cadaver dogs to search for a missing person, it means something specific. It means they are no longer searching for a survivor. It means the working assumption has shifted, quietly, officially, and with devastating finality, from rescue to recovery. And when those cadaver dogs are K9 units from the United States Coast Guard deployed to a foreign country at the request of that country's own law enforcement, it means the investigation has reached a level of federal seriousness that leaves very little room for alternative explanations. On April 16, 2026, 12 days after Lynette Hooker vanished in the waters near Elbow Cay in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas, U.S. Coast Guard cadaver dogs touched down in Hopetown. The Assistant Commissioner of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, Eduardo Damies, confirmed their arrival to ABC News. The K9 team was on the ground and working the shoreline that same morning. And while those dogs swept the beaches and mangroves and shallow coastal terrain of the Abaco Islands, searching for any trace of Lynette Hooker, something else was happening simultaneously. Something that every person following this case needs to understand in full. Because the cadaver dogs were only one piece of a rapidly accelerating investigative picture. And the new clues emerging from every direction in this case are painting a portrait of the night of April 4th, 2026, that looks nothing like the story Brian Hooker told the world. To understand what investigators were actually looking for and why cadaver dogs represent such a seismic escalation in any missing persons case, you need to understand what these animals can do that no human search team, no drone, no submersible, and no satellite image can replicate. Cadaver dogs, formerly known as human remains detection dogs, are trained to detect the specific scent compounds released by decomposing human tissue. They can detect those compounds through soil, through water, through concrete, and through the kind of dense coastal vegetation that lines the shoreline of the Abaco Cays. Vegetation that would be nearly impossible for a human search team to penetrate systematically. A retired K9 officer told Fox News Digital in a separate case that cadaver dogs are considered, in a court of law, a scientific instrument. Their alerts are not guesses, they are evidence. So when the United States Coast Guard dispatched a cadaver K9 team to Hopetown, Bahamas on April 16th, they were not doing so as a formality or a gesture of goodwill. They were doing so because the investigative picture they had been assembling for 12 days pointed towards something that required a different kind of search. One that was no longer looking for Lynette Hooker alive. By the time those dogs arrived on the ground, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force had already conducted what it described in an official statement as extensive shoreline patrols, sea patrols, aerial drone surveillance, and submersible drone operations across the waters around Elbow Cay and the surrounding Abaco Islands. That statement concluded with a sentence that landed like a stone. To date, these efforts have not resulted in the location of the missing individual. 7 words. 7 words that told Lynette Hooker's family everything they already feared. She had not been found, not in the water, not on a beach, not anywhere that 2 weeks of intensive multi-agency searching had been able to reach. And that absence, that profound, agonizing absence of a body, was itself beginning to tell investigators something important. Because here is the detail that a forensic analysis posted on the sailing community website Spiotia laid out with a precision that stunned the true crime world when it was published in mid-April. The soulmate was anchored in the waters between Hopetown and Ant Pat's Bay on the night of April 4th. The distance from the yacht's anchorage to the nearest beach on Elbow Cay was approximately 600 feet. Along the deep draft anchor line, where a vessel like the soulmate would naturally sit, the distance to the Cay shore dropped to as little as 300 feet in places. 300 feet. That is the length of a football field. In calm, shallow water. A person in the water at that location, any person regardless of swimming ability, was 1 to 2 minutes from dry land. That number had been absent from every mainstream media account of Lynette Hooker's disappearance. Every report had positioned her as a woman swept away by currents in open water. Nobody had told the public how close she actually was to shore when she allegedly fell overboard. And that forensic detail changes the fundamental question investigators were asking. It was no longer just, where did the current take her? It was, why hasn't she been found at all, given how close to land she was? The forensic analysis offered 3 possibilities. The body was weighted inside the Sea of Abaco Basin at a location the search cone had not reached. The body was outside the basin in offshore water east of the southern cuts. Or, and this is the possibility the cadaver dogs were deployed to address, the body was buried ashore in coastal terrain. That third possibility, burial on land, is one that investigators had not publicly discussed until the cadaver dogs arrived, but it was one they had clearly already considered, because the geography of the Abaco Islands creates a very specific forensic challenge that goes far beyond the water search. Lubber's Quarters Key, the narrow quay that runs parallel to Elbow Cay along the route Brian Hooker claimed to have paddled, is composed almost entirely of impenetrable limestone bedrock. That geology is not theoretical. Limestone in the Abaco Islands is hard, dense, and sits just below the surface of the thin layer of soil that covers it. You cannot dig through it without heavy equipment. You cannot excavate it by hand in the dark. That bedrock geology, investigators determined, effectively rules out a land burial on Lubber's Quarters Key. The limestone says no, which brings the cadaver dogs back to the beaches and shoreline of Hopetown itself, the area where the search was focused from the beginning, and to what was happening on and around the soulmate in the hours surrounding Lynette's disappearance. Because while the dogs were working the shoreline, investigators were simultaneously piecing together a series of new witness accounts and surveillance details that directly challenged Brian Hooker's version of events. Details that had been quietly accumulating since April 4th and were now beginning to break through into public view. The first involved the Abaco Inn bartender, a man named Ken, a 38-year-old local who had worked at the inn for years and was one of the last people to see Brian and Lynette Hooker before she disappeared, gave what was described as an exclusive account of the couple's final evening. He described their poolside visit to the Abaco Inn on April 4th in detail. He said they had been drinking, and then he said something that sent a ripple through the investigation. Surveillance footage from the Abaco Inn showed the couple still at the pool area at a specific timestamp. According to the account, they left the inn at approximately 6:38 in the evening, which means that between 6:38 p.m., when they left the inn, and 7:30 p.m., when Brian told police the dinghy incident occurred, there was a gap of nearly 1 full hour, an unaccounted gap in the timeline, a gap in which nobody can say with certainty what Brian and Lynette Hooker were doing or where they were. Brian said Lynette fell overboard at approximately 7:30 p.m. He said he paddled for hours and arrived at the Marsh Harbor boatyard at approximately 4 in the morning. Roughly 8.5 hours later, Mo Monesteams, a local boat captain who had worked the Abaco waters for 15 years and who recreated the dinghy route for Fox News Digital, said the ride from the harbor to the couple's anchorage near Aunt Pat's Bay took approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes, not 8.5 hours. Not even close to 8.5 hours. That gap between a 4-minute ride and an 8.5-hour ordeal is something that investigators in the local boating community around Great Abaco Island had been struggling to explain from day one. Then came the witness with the most disturbing account of all. A witness whose identity has not been publicly confirmed told investigators that they heard a massive splash near the soulmate at approximately 9:30 in the evening on April 4th, not 7:30. Not during the dinghy ride Brian described. At 9:30 p.m., 2 hours after Lynette was supposedly already overboard and in the water, if that witness account is accurate, something large entered the water near the soulmate at a times when, according to Brian Hooker's own account, he was already paddling toward Marsh Harbor, and Lynette had already been in the water for 2 hours. Read that again slowly. Brian said the incident happened at 7:30. A witness says they heard a massive splash near the soulmate at 9:30. The soulmate was their home vessel, the 46-foot sailboat sitting anchored in Aunt Pat's Bay. If Brian was already paddling away from the scene at 7:30, nobody should have been on or near the soulmate at 9:30. There should have been nothing to splash. And then there was the light. A surveillance camera on Lubber's Quarters Cay, the limestone bedrock island that runs parallel to the route Brian described paddling, captured light activity near the soulmate at a time that did not align with Brian's stated timeline. Investigators' independent analysts who reviewed that footage noted that if Brian had already left the area in the dinghy by 7:30, the soulmate should have been sitting dark and empty. The presence of light activity near the vessel at a later hour raised the exact same question as the 9:30 splash. Was Brian still on the soulmate after Lynette disappeared? Had he returned to the boat? Was someone else there? And if so, what were they doing? These questions did not exist in a vacuum. They existed within the context of a federal criminal investigation that had been running parallel to the Bahamian search effort since the earliest days of April. The Coast Guard Investigative Service, CGS, had opened its criminal probe almost immediately, and by late April, CBS News reported that CGIS investigators were actively looking beyond the dinghy route described in Brian's account and were specifically seeking potential witnesses who may have been near the soulmate before or around the time Lynette was reported missing. A Coast Guard memo obtained by CBS News stated directly that the owners and occupants of a mystery sailboat moored near the soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay that night may have information relevant to the CGS investigation. That mystery sailboat was now one of the most important leads in the entire case. Who was anchored close enough to the Soulmont on the night of April 4th to have seen or heard what really happened? Who might have witnessed a massive splash at 9:30 p.m.? Who might have seen light activity on a boat that was supposed to be empty? Meanwhile, as all of this was unfolding in the Bahamas, Brian Hooker left the islands. 2 days after being released from police custody without charges on April 13th, his attorney confirmed he had departed the Bahamas. The stated reason was that his mother was not well. He left while cadaver dogs were actively searching for his missing wife on the beaches of Hopetown. He left while CGS agents were conducting active witness interviews. He left while the soulmate was still sitting on a mooring ball in Marsh Harbor, full of whatever it held. He left. Lynette's daughter Carly Aylesworth did not leave. She flew to the Bahamas herself, met with both Bahamian authorities and U.S. Coast Guard investigators, and retraced the dinghy route her mother had supposedly been on when she disappeared. She said she found no immediate contradictions to Brian's route in the physical layout of the water, but she made clear that her doubts had not diminished by a single degree. "I don't understand how she drowned or got floated away," she told ABC News. "It just made me be more. Why didn't he do this? Why didn't you do that? Why did that happen?" And then, on Mother's Day, May 11th, the case exploded again. Carly noticed the soulmate moving. Two unidentified men were sailing it out of Marsh Harbor, heading north up the east coast of the United States. Their GPS was off. She posted a video from her phone in real time, watching the boat that had been her mother's home for 3 years disappearing over the horizon. Piloted by strangers with a disabled tracking signal, the Coast Guard was already watching. Within hours of Carly's video going live, U.S. Coast Guard special agents from Sector Miami intercepted the soulmate approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. The vessel lost engine power during the interdiction and was taken under tow by the Coast Guard cutter Winslow Grisser through Fort Pierce Inlet to Coast Guard Station, Fort Pierce in Florida, where drone images the next morning showed it sitting at the dock, wrapped in crime scene tape, with agents in blue gloves conducting a full forensic examination of the vessel. Crime scene tape on the soulmate federal agents going through every surface, every storage compartment, every piece of electronics. Forensic scientist Joseph Scott Morgan told Fox News Digital that investigators were almost certainly looking for large focal areas of blood. Dried blood, clean surfaces, any evidence of an effort to sanitize the boat. He noted the challenge. The soulmate had been sitting in tropical heat for over 5 weeks before it was seized, and every day that passed allowed decomposition, saltwater exposure, and the marine environment to degrade whatever biological evidence may have been present. But here is what forensic science also tells us. Blood does not simply disappear. Luminol and other detection chemicals reveal traces that have been cleaned, scrubbed, and bleached, traces invisible to the naked eye, traces in bilge water and under floorboards and in the cracks between surfaces that no amount of cleaning ever fully reaches on a 46-foot vessel with dozens of compartments below the waterline. And the soulmate had more to give than blood alone. The chart plotter at the helm stored route history and GPS waypoints that may be recoverable even if partially deleted. The VHF radio log transmissions. The autopilot recorded its operational history. Every phone, tablet, and electronic device left aboard was subject to full digital forensic analysis. And the 8-foot dinghy, the small, hard-bottomed tender at the absolute center of this entire case, was itself a potential crime scene with surfaces that no amount of paddling through Bahamian waters would fully explain if something else had happened inside it before Brian reached the marina at 4 in the morning. The Coast Guard confirmed the seizure in a formal press release that used one specific phrase: active criminal investigation, not a missing persons inquiry, not a maritime accident review. A criminal investigation conducted by the federal law enforcement arm of the United States Coast Guard against a vessel they physically intercepted in open water, towed to a federal facility, sealed with crime scene tape, and began processing with gloved agents the morning after it arrived. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorney, Terrell Butler, stated from day one that he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing and is cooperating fully with authorities. The presumption of innocence is the foundation of the American legal system, and it applies here as it does everywhere. We are not here to deliver a verdict. We are here to lay out every verified fact in this case. Every confirmed timeline detail, every witness account, every forensic development, every piece of documented evidence, and let you see the full picture. The full picture is this. A woman vanished on Easter Sunday in some of the shallowest, calmest, most navigated waters in the northern Bahamas. A time-stamped photograph showed conditions that directly contradicted her husband's account of violent seas. Her husband gave 3 different accounts to 3 different people. The GPS data from the motor that could have placed his exact location that night was destroyed. He left the island while cadaver dogs were searching for his wife. A witness heard a massive splash near the soulmate 2 after she was supposedly already in the water. Surveillance footage captured unexplained light activity near the vessel after it should have been empty. The soulmate was intercepted in open water with its tracker turned off and is now in federal custody, and federal agents are currently processing it as a crime scene. Lynette Hooker has been missing for over 7 weeks. She was 55 years old, a mother from Michigan who found her joy on the open water and shared it with thousands of people who admired her from the other side of a screen. The cadaver dogs searched Hopetown. The federal agents are working Fort Pierce, and somewhere in the gap between a 4-minute boat ride and an 8.5-hour ordeal, between a glass-calm sea and a story about violent waves, between a massive splash at 9:30 and a woman who was supposed to be overboard since 7:30, the truth about what happened to Lynette Hooker is waiting to be found. And from where this investigation sits right now, it will not wait much longer. Justice for Lynette. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lynette Hooker or were near Aunt Pat's Bay in the Abaco Islands on or around April 4th, 2026, contact the Coast Guard Investigative Service immediately. Your information could close this case